So that movie wasn't at all what I expected. Barbarian. So Barbarian is a new suspense horror movie, and it's directed by Zach Kreger, who hasn't directed that many things. I mean, his IMDb credits for directing is only like 3. But after seeing this movie, I can say that the dude has the horror movie chops. This is a very competently directed, well-structured, well-made horror movie. And I know a lot of people have already said this, but the trailers really don't give you the full picture of what this movie's about. The stuff that you see with Georgina Campbell and Bill Skarsgård is really only the first 15 minutes, if I'm being generous, of the movie. The rest of it, I really can't get into without spoiling the movie, and I'm not going to spoil it for you because I want you to go into this movie somewhat blind, because that's how I went in, and it was a fantastic experience because the movie really does ask a lot of its audience. It's the kind of movie that doesn't give you everything at once. You kind of have to figure it out on your own, and the movie will leave breadcrumbs, and if you follow those breadcrumbs, you'll get to some pretty horrifying conclusions, but the movie doesn't really show or say any of this right away. It saves a lot of the bigger reveals for the third act, like you're supposed to do. But nevertheless, it's so fascinating following these breadcrumbs and coming up with theories about what's going on in this house. Who is this barbarian that the title's referring to? And that's really the fun part, is trying to figure out who or what is this barbarian. Because over the course of this movie, there's a couple different contenders for who's the real barbarian. And by the end of the movie, I think it does give you a somewhat definitive answer of who this barbarian is. But at the end of the day, it's all your own interpretation. The movie never outright calls someone a barbarian. So at the end of the day, it's still up to you to make that judgment for yourself. And while it's definitely a risk to not spell everything out for your audience, I do really appreciate that kind of filmmaking because it allows your audience to get that much more invested and involved in trying to figure out the mystery that's been laid out for us. But all that aside, a good story is only as good as its characters. And the main players in this movie, or at least what the trailers made us assume the main players in this movie were, are Georgina Campbell as Tess, Bill Skarsgård as Keith, and Justin Long as AJ. Now AJ is a character that the trailer showed the least, so I'm going to say the least about him. All I can say is that he comes in a bit later in the movie to add a bit more dimension and context to everything that's going on, and he is what I would call a morally gray character. And even that might be giving him too much credit because he does some really messed up things in this movie, but there's some about his performance that's so captivating and almost likable to the point where I actually found myself kind of invested in his situation and his stakes. But I have to stop there because even that's kind of bordering on spoiler territory. You just have to see the movie yourself to understand what I'm talking about. But what I can talk more about is the relationship between Tess and Keith. They're the ones that you see in the beginning of the trailer. They both booked the same Airbnb and she shows up late at night and they have to kind of make the best of this messed up situation, and you don't know anything about him, he doesn't know anything about her. But what this movie does very cleverly is that, at least in the beginning of the movie, it's told through Tess's point of view, so we're endeared to her very early on. We feel pity because she's going into this Airbnb late at night in a kind of sketchy neighborhood, and it's raining, and it's just a terrible situation, so we want to see her succeed right away. But then Pennywise shows up, and I know it's not Pennywise, it's Bill Skarsgård. But even so, I feel like a lot of people still associate Bill Skarsgård with Pennywise and that creepy, unsettling character that he portrayed so well, that I promise everyone who sees this movie is immediately gonna assume that Keith is a terrible person. He's hiding some big secret, and while I can't really talk about that, I will say that the beginning of this movie, this section with the two of them, it is a masterclass in tension and suspense. And it actually kind of reminded me of Psycho, the Alfred Hitchcock movie, because Bill Skarsgård in this movie was giving off a lot of Norman Bates vibes early on, where the beauty of Psycho is that Norman Bates doesn't actually seem like a bad guy. Yeah, he's got kind of a peeping problem, but aside from that, you feel like he's this innocent middle school boy trapped in a man's body that, yeah, he's socially awkward and he probably doesn't always say the right things, but he means well and he's trying to accommodate Marion, so you're kind of endeared to him even though underneath there's something sketchy going on here. That's how I felt in the first act of this movie, because just like the first time you see Psycho, you don't know if Norman is a good guy or a bad guy. You don't know if Bill Skarsgård is a good guy or a bad guy in this scenario. And as soon as I saw the first couple interactions, I was hooked. I was like, okay, I'm invested in this movie. This is actually probably going to be a good movie. But the thing you need to know going into this movie is that it's not a straightforward narrative. And it's not even as straightforward as Psycho. And Psycho had a huge paradigm shifting twist about halfway. This movie has 2, maybe 3 of them throughout this runtime. And it really does keep you guessing for where this story is going. What's the conclusion? Because I thought I was in this place and now you're taking me over here. And how do these two come back together? I don't know, but you sucked me in with the conversation of these two awkward people, so I guess I'm here for it. But like I said earlier in the review, if you pay attention to all the little details and little clues and thematic connections, the movie does a great job at telling its story. It's an unconventional way of telling it, sure, but it's nevertheless effective. And if you're patient, by the end of this movie, all the breadcrumbs will lead to a very intense and very satisfying conclusion. Oh, and I guess one other thing in this movie is that it has a social message, because, you know, a lot of movies nowadays seem to just have one, whether or not it fits in the story naturally at all. But I actually thought that the message, or should I say messages, in this movie, there's more than one, and they kind of feed off of each other, felt very natural. And any movie whose social message is nuanced enough for me to think about it more than, I don't know, 15 seconds. Because let's be honest, nowadays a lot of social messages in movies are so lazy, they only take about 10 seconds of thought, and now you've figured out the whole crux of the movie. But this one really took me the entire runtime of the movie, and on top of that, an hour or so of reflection to really understand what it was trying to say and the layers of it. Because it's not just surface level pandering to a specific audience. I feel like this movie really had something to say, and I really did appreciate how it was delivered and how they used horror tropes and grotesque and frightening imagery to get that point across. It was quite impressive. And yes, this movie does have a lot of frightening and horrific imagery in it. I mean, there are images in this movie that I am not going to be able to get out of my head for quite a while. But the caveat on that is that if you're afraid of violence, this movie isn't particularly violent. A lot of the violence in this movie either happens off screen or covered up by shadow or kind of subdued to a degree where you don't see all blood and guts and everything. But what the movie does show are some truly horrifying and grotesque life and death situations where if I was in those situations, I have no idea what I would do. And that's really the best compliment you can give a horror movie like this, because it did exactly what it set out to do. It actually shocked and horrified me. And for a horror movie, that's actually pretty hard to do. Most horror movies don't actually scare me, you know, like in my chest. But this one, there were a few moments when I wasn't sure if I wanted to walk home that night. But now I turn over to you guys. What did you think about Barbarian? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And let me know, what do you think about this new setup? It's kind of a work in progress. I've moved back down to Atlanta to finish my last year of film school, so that's very exciting. So because of that, things are going to be looking a little bit different, but don't worry, I'll still be getting content out to you guys on a regular basis. So if you like this video and want to see more, be sure to click that like button and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby, this is Minority Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.